Hi, I'm Janet Gross. Welcome to Coping Today, a place where we talk about mental health and well-being. Today we're talking about surviving a crisis, facing it, navigating it, and coming out the other side, and finding the help you need along the way. Dr. Roy Salgado, professor of counseling at the University of Holy Cross, is here to talk about that. Roy, I'm not so sure that anybody goes through life without a crisis, because a lot of different things. And, you know, so many things fall into that crisis category. Let's start with the definition. What is a crisis?
Sure. A crisis can manifest itself in a number of different ways. We have individuals, any one of us who at any point in our life can experience an individual crisis. Perhaps someone who is the victim of a crime. A crime doesn't happen to everyone all at once, but it might happen to individuals one at a time, whether it be a sexual assault, a home invasion, things of that nature. So you might have that type of crisis that's more individualized and that everyone does not necessarily experience. But then you might have something that's a little more macro-systemic or global in nature, where you might have a natural disaster, an active shooter event, a terrorist attack, things of that nature that multiple individuals experience that crisis at the same time. And so when someone comes into that type of experience, a mental health provider perhaps could be someone that they would need to process this information with in order to be able to more effectively overcome a given crisis.
Okay, so is there a difference in the way we react to the mental health issues that might come up if it's a personal crisis or a group?
That's a great question. Both and. It could be everyone's an individual, so you might have individuals who panic in the immediate aftermath of a crisis. And so, you know, we have our traditional response of fight or flight or faint or freeze. And so you might have a person who, you know, in the midst of a crisis fights to survive and get through that crisis, which is a healthy thing to do, or flees to get out of that burning building or what have you.
Also healthy.
Also healthy. So when somebody fights or somebody flees, that's a natural healthy response to a crisis situation, to survive. When you faint or freeze is when it can become life-threatening. People oftentimes find themselves, there's so much overload in the system when a person's in a crisis mode, those individuals perhaps panic and they can't get the life vest on, they can't get onto that life boat, and then they drown in the midst of the crisis. What a mental health provider can offer an individual is in the midst of a crisis or shortly thereafter, if they're still in that panic mode, help them acquire the skills to be able to confront and face whatever crisis situation might be in their immediate present situation.
Because is part of it that the panic or whatever it is just continues on after things have resolved?
Yes, that's exactly the point. You know, if a person is experiencing a crisis situation, it's going to be natural that the body, the organism responds in a crisis type of situation to fight or flee, to faint or freeze in that given moment. But once the situation has subsided and that threat is no longer there, when that symptomology continues and persists over a period of time, typically beyond a 14 to 30-day period of time, and it's no longer acute but chronic, then that's something that needs to be addressed, because the body's not meant to continue to respond to a crisis situation in perpetuity.
You can't, it's hard to go through daily life when you're still in that, that kind of thing. So if somebody does need treatment for that or help for that, or, I mean, there's help out there. That's
the wonderful thing. You know, at the University of Holy Cross, for example, you know, we offer telemental health counseling services free of charge to members of our community. And so we have done that for several years. We continue to do so, and we do it remotely to any resident in the state of Louisiana. So if you have an individual who is experiencing crises, you know, they could reach us, call, and set up an appointment, and that counselor will be assigned to you to be able to offer services. So if you are dealing with a crisis situation, a traumatic event, and you perhaps now are dealing with the aftermath and you have PTSD, just to say, then you can acquire the skills to be able to mitigate that symptomology and overcome whatever the presenting issue is. You know, we have unfortunately situations where people are survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking. All of these different things are very real and personal crises that can happen in a person's life. But a mental health provider can offer you the skills necessary to be able to overcome such situations.
And it doesn't have to be a long-term thing. They can help almost immediately by just helping you through this particular thing.
Right, and to know that you're not alone. It feels very alone when you're going through certain crises. Perhaps when you're going through something that the whole world goes through, such as a pandemic or a natural disaster, you know, there's some sort of comfort knowing that others are experiencing the same thing. But when you're the victim of a crime, when you are going through an individual crisis that everyone else is moving along with their life, and you're here holding this bag of trauma, if you will, it's helpful to know that there is a mental health provider, someone else out there that understands what it is that you're going through, that is empathic to your situation and is there for your specific need and help you out.
And there are ways to help out. So that's so key to understand. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more about the signs and symptoms of someone facing a crisis and how they might need help. Stay with us.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. When going through a crisis, some people might need more help to walk that path. And we have asked Anna Rivera, licensed professional counselor at the University of Holy Cross and a University of Holy Cross alum, to talk about that with us. Thank you for joining us, Anna. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, as a counselor, what symptoms do you see that might indicate that somebody's is going through a crisis or has been through and just can't get over it?
I think we can see a variety of issues and symptoms. When clients come in, they're experiencing fear, anger, irritability, frustration, sadness. They're having crying episodes. It's a big variety of things, honestly. A good bit of anxiety, though. And many times these are accompanied by somatic symptoms, so they'll be having muscle tension, headaches, digestive issues, especially in children. I see that that's a big indicator when they're having digestive issues. And I also notice with some clients, they're experiencing a good level of numbness. And in the more severe cases, I would say even like some level of dissociation.
Numbness, you're talking emotional numbness or?
Emotional numbness, okay. Yes, emotional numbness. And they talk about having nightmares constantly. They notice changes in their appetite or even in their sleeping patterns as well. So I would say those are the more generalized indicators there.
With that emotional numbness piece, I wonder, what have you seen in terms of how they present? Because it's when a person is going through crises, it's usually something very significant and impactful that perhaps threatened the individual's life. And then when they talk about these horrific things, and then they're numb to it, I would imagine that it is more of a stoic look about something that somebody else would kind of cringe at hearing what they're talking about.
Yes.
And they're just saying it again. I've said it 10,000 times and I'm saying it again, and it's a not the typical response to a very challenging and difficult topic.
Yes, and I think you will see that more predominantly with people who have been through several crises. People who have lived in a very dysfunctional environment, they just don't have those healthy coping skills. So at some point, it's almost like they've tuned out of life, and they come in just looking, even in their appearance, like they're not really taking care of themselves, engaging in any sort of self-care. And you can just see that emotional numbness. And there are times where I'm sitting across from an individual who is telling me something that's truly traumatic, and they just don't really have that emotional response to it at that time.
I mean, it's kind of matter of fact, kind of like it's happened to somebody else, or what?
In some cases, but I think what I noticed, especially with this type of individual that has been through many instances of crisis and trauma, is that it seems like somewhere along the way they just kind of received this wrongful message that what happened to them didn't matter, that what they think, that what they feel doesn't matter. And I think that it just gets ingrained so much they detach from themselves emotionally, and that's why you'll just kind of hear this very blunt response when you're speaking to them.
Which would make sense, when a person detaches and they remove themselves from whatever the event might be, it's almost a protective mechanism on some level.
Right. Yeah, it's almost a coping mechanism. They've learned, and this is where I come in with that level of dissociation even a little bit. You notice that they really just kind of, that's their way of coping. It hurts less in that moment if I just kind of don't really connect with what I'm feeling.
Right.
Is it difficult to help them see a way out, or do they even think there's a way out?
At times it can be very difficult, but I think that when they do come into therapy, the first thing you have to focus on is building a rapport, a relationship, and trust with that client. because they do need to understand that their life matters, that what they feel and what they think matters. And so you need to build that so that when you convey that, they can accept that. That they can really just take that from a place of, I can accept this. I can see that you, as my therapist, you are making me feel like this matters, and so I think that that's the primary thing to do, and listen, just really listen to their narrative.
Is it maybe they waited too long, or not too long, but they waited long, and had they gone earlier, it might have been easier for help?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. But so I primarily work with the Hispanic community, as well as Dr. Salgado and other colleagues of mine. And when my clients predominantly have been clients who have been through several issues, like I mentioned before, and so it's just kind of like a way of life for them now. You really. They start seeing a way out when you do build that trust, and when you start helping them look at what has happened in ways where they can move forward, but building healthier relationships, probably recognizing their triggers and their stressors, and making a point to separate themselves from those things that have led to a very dysfunctional life, I think.
What do you do? How do you lead them to get over this or walk through this?
Yeah, so after you've built that relationship with the client, something that comes paired with some of the things that I've just mentioned is that because they have such a low sense of self-worth, I think that they've allowed themselves to be in situations or in relationships that are harmful, abusive even, and you have to boundary setting. Like, that's going to be very important with them, to learn where to set limits with people, to learn to say no, to learn to not always be available for others that take advantage of them and that even abuse them. They also have to recognize what the triggers and the stressors are. Just having an awareness so that they can avoid or just try to find some way around those things that exacerbate their symptoms. And also I think learning to make themselves a priority. A lot of the clients that I see, oh, I'm a single mother, or oh, I as the father, I'm the sole provider of my family, or I'm always the sister that everybody comes through with their problems, and so I don't really have time for myself. I can't practice self-care. And it's like, well, no, look, you're here. We have to recognize that your body and your mind are telling you that it's time to hit that pause button and take care of yourself. Make that time for your self-care and just validate, your own feelings and your emotions.
When a person experiences crises, that initial event, that activating event, is shocking. It's not something that you plan for. It's not something that is on the schedule, it's on the calendar. It just comes at you. Right. And then the body responds in that survival mechanism. And then if it's continual, if it's chronic, if they are the recipient of crises after crises, let's say childhood sexual trauma, for example. Yeah. Then the body just learns to separate itself out. It dissociates, it fugues, and then that protective mechanism. And then if you develop that habit over a lifetime, then you see that stoic person who doesn't take the time to take care of themselves, and they just roll through each day. And then years go by and they're numb to it, as you had said earlier. And so to the extent that you and other providers are able to get them to pause and say, no, self-care is important. This habit of constantly putting it off and staying it off is not going to be helpful for you. What I'm hearing you say is that you remind them that it's okay to overcome it by having that self-care.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that I try to help them understand as well is that anxiety, depression always has a way of finding you. I feel like it kind of knocks on little doors in your mind of like, hey, I'm here, you need to attend to me, we need to take care of this, and once they're able to understand that the anxiety or the numbness or the depression is trying to relay something to them that means we have to make a change somewhere, I think they're more open to that.
We need to listen to our bodies. We need to listen to what it is that we're telling ourselves when we're faced with such a situation. I think you're absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Isn't it hard to make somebody like that who is a giving person, even though they've been hurt so much, to say, turn the help to yourself? Turn your attention to yourself as opposed to helping your sister, your mom, your, whatever it is.
There are times where it's very difficult, and it takes several, weeks, months, to kind of really relay that message. And, it's because I have some of them tell me like, oh no, but I'm okay with this. I'm okay with being the one that everybody comes to. I'm okay with handling everybody's problems. But then there's a session where they walk in, and you can tell that they're really not doing well and they're not able to handle everyone's issues and, whatever else is going on at that moment. And that's when you have to kind of like do that little check-in with them of like, hey, we have some responsibility to take here, and it's not for others, it's for yourself.
And the system fights back, right? So if you empower this individual to start to take care of themselves and then they're not tending to these other things, then they're like, why aren't you doing this anymore? You used to do this for me. And so we look for homeostasis, and so then that can be a source of stress. And so I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to continue with the status quo and play my role within this system.
Right, yeah, they want you to go back into your box, and so that is very difficult, but I think that that's where the boundaries need to come in, to really just kind of relay that message. And I will be very direct with clients at times, that at least in terms of when we're going through that therapy process, when they're contending with things that are very difficult, if there is someone in your environment, or if there's, just some sort of event or something that you do regularly that is not helping right now and is exacerbating your symptoms, you may need to distance yourself from this for a while. And some clients decide at the end that there are people in their lives or situations that they just need to cut off completely for their own well-being. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anna Rivera, for being with us here in studio. We really appreciate your input and advice.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Back in a moment. Stay with us.
Our money, she's my purpose. I'm here to walk with her, hold her hand until she can walk alone. Kind of like being a father in this world.
And we're back talking about facing and surviving a crisis and how it affects us. Dr. Thomas Fonseca, Associate Professor of Counseling at the University of Holy Cross, joins us now. Dr. Fonseca, I know that you train other providers in treating clients in these special situations. Are these handled differently?
Yes, they are. We train counselors to be able to go out and handle individual crises and systemic crises. And so they most certainly are.
Okay, so I guess, and there are different crises, like, things that already, or a response to crises, event-induced crisis and just regular crisis. How do you determine how to handle each event?
Well, we teach our students, our counselors, to go out and to first assess, to quickly assess, and then to obviously to remain calm when entering a situation, and then to also make certain that that the counselors are calm and grounded, and they take a deep breath before they're entering a scenario, regardless of the scenario. It's a crisis event. We essentially teach counselors to be able to choose their words carefully, and regardless of the crisis event, consider the verbal, paraverbal, and nonverbal skills and levels of communication.
And when you see those types of events take place, as we referenced earlier, you might have the survivor of sexual assault. And so that could happen at 2 o'clock in the morning, let's say, and they are now in the emergency room going through the examination as a response to that sexual assault. And so you might have the counselor on call who goes out to the site to do that initial assessment after that type of crisis, and that's going to look a certain way. Then you might have the counselor who addresses a different type of scenario. Let's say you have a natural disaster that occurs, and then people have lost everything, and they're at a shelter, and then it's the hours and days immediately thereafter, and so they have to go to that event and look at multiple people and assess and intervene accordingly. And so counselors receive the appropriate and requisite training to be able to have this specialization in confronting crises, be they individual or systemic in nature.
Dr. Fonseca, you mentioned that, just even body language can be an issue for the counselor, and to really, they have to know how to behave. That's a weird word, but you know what I mean, to how to present themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. We call that rational detachment. That is where the counselor is able to remain an individual, a human being who's able to deal with their own emotions first, so that they then can care for others. As a caregiver, self-care is one of the most important things, I think never more so than in a time of crisis. And so again, understanding that behavior influences behavior, our counselor does not want to enter into a crisis scenario unnerved and nervous and full of anxiety. You'll infect your environment. So we do train them to decompress and to be able to work through those emotions before they enter a crisis scenario.
Mm-hmm. My guess is that a lot of people, when they are facing this crisis, they're uncertain. What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen next? You know, can this person help me? All those things have to factor into, you know, probably the first sentence that comes out of anybody's mouth.
Right, right. And oftentimes a person who is experiencing a crisis, the identified client or the individual who's going through it in the moment, oftentimes are shocked.
Right.
And
yeah.
so you want to have a professional who comes in with a calming presence who themselves is not going to be impacted. I mean, clearly we're going to be impacted, but that we can have that rational detachment where we can go ahead and offer that services, not too dissimilar from when you're on a plane and they give the flight attendant gives the announcement of staying calm and putting on the mask first so that you can tend to those around you. One needs to be able to stay calm and tend to themselves and their own needs and do that self-care preventatively in nature so that you can go into a crisis situation and be of utmost competence to the people who are going through the event in that moment.
It's got to be, I'm thinking, Dr. Fonseca, it has to be that moment, has to be a trust-building moment.
Absolutely. I think body language plays one of the most important things. Having open gestures, a very open spirit whenever you're approaching an individual, that is something that's crucial. You need to certainly be non-threatening. And remember, as a crisis interventionist, as a counselor, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that you can listen twice as much and speak half as much or even less. So allow the person to vent. If they're venting and getting out any emotions and expressing themselves, that is actually a good thing.
I mean, that's what, as a counselor anyway, that's what you want them to tell you, right?
That's right. It does help because that healing process can begin, but in the immediate aftermath of a crisis, we want to make certain that an individual is always safe, all medical needs are taken care of, and we have to remind the individual that we're helping. We got to get them grounded in the here and now, and that they are currently safe, and they're in the presence of you, a caregiver. And so that is certainly most important.
And it's part of that initial assessment too, that basic needs are met, that when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, are they currently safe? Are they currently well hydrated, fed? Because the body needs to be in tune. You need to be well hydrated, you need to be fed, you need to be clean to the extent that you can be clean, so hygiene is important. And having those basic fundamental needs met, when a person is fed and hydrated and clean, that's a big part of moving towards recovery after whatever event, whether it's an attack of some sort or natural disaster, to bring that semblance of health and wellness. The physiological needs being met initially are crucial in that. And then coupled with that, feeling safe and secure in the moment, grounding the individual. Right now, you're safe. Right now, we're here with you. We're here to listen. Tell us what it is that you need. And just being able to capture that information from a person who is experiencing that shock and that distress in a given moment.
And how comforting is that in the beginning when somebody's taking care of you? Like you you need something to drink, you need something to eat, all these things. And I guess, Dr. Fonseca, in a crisis situation especially, you know, that's when they're realizing, oh, I might not have eaten, I might not have had anything to drink for a while, I haven't, done anything for myself. Right. So I think that's an interesting aspect of just being able to go in to an unknown situation in a crisis moment and being able to handle it. And I know we're talking a lot about counselors, but for the person on the other side, you've trained and you train people to see what's coming from them and what they're thinking about the terror or uncertainty, or is this ever going to end?
Right. One of the things to remind the individual who has endured a crisis or coming down from a crisis event is that no crisis event lasts forever. Now, the after effects of the crisis event is something that we're also trained to work with an individual and to help them in the recovery process. And that's a rebuilding process. And sometimes it's a long process, but it is certainly very possible, and it happens all the time.
That's a very important note, that it doesn't last forever, that the event comes unexpectedly, perhaps, and even if you do expect something like a hurricane, for example, but it comes and it passes. And for the individual to come to realize that right now you are safe, it has passed, and we're here with you. And so that's a big element and a big thing to get the individuals to start to recognize as early as possible that the immediate threat is gone. Now we have to pick up the pieces, whether it's a building, whether it's the emotional scars that have been left. We have to start to tend to those, but the immediate threat is now past, and it's important to start that as soon as possible to let the person start to really hear that, even if they don't buy into it initially, but that they start to hear it early on.
How important is crisis intervention, and just in maybe businesses or hospitals or all those things? I mean, you're skilled in this. How important is this to have this at the ready?
It's essential. I mean, it truly is in any workplace, in any environment, to be able to effectively deal with crises that enter into our lives and that happen. It's really important that we are able to cope with them. And that's where we encourage individuals to reach out for help. And we are often, as mental health professionals, that help. So it is important. I teach the nonviolent crisis prevention training for the Archdiocese of New Orleans. And this summer, the Archdiocese had all of their mental health professionals working within the schools trained under that particular model. That model in the Crisis Prevention Institute teaches individuals your approach changes everything, your attitude, all of those communication skills, the verbal, paraverbal, nonverbal levels of communication that is so crucial in the time of crisis. So it's important to have this, not just this training, but any level of training where you can prepare, where you can go through exercises, and therefore you have the practice, and therefore you feel better prepared. Your perception is that you're better prepared to deal with someone in the throes of a crisis. And then, of course, you call for help. You may need another mental health professional or a friend. You try to expand that support system for the individual that's experienced the crisis. And anytime that an individual reaches out to a therapist or mental health professional for assistance, they have expanded their support system by one. And that one is important.
Yeah.
And they keep expanding.
Right.
Dr. Fensiken, thank you so much for talking and explaining this, because this is fascinating. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, Dr. Roy, some tips before we go?
Yes, it's important to know that none of us are immune to a potential crisis, and crises can come at us at any given moment. So if and when that were to occur, stay calm. It's important to stay calm during a crisis, and immediately thereafter to meet basic needs such as food, water, hygiene, and shelter, and then to secure safety in the immediate moments after a crisis. Those initial steps and those preventative measures that are planned before something ever happens are going to be crucial to helping that person move towards recovery after an event.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Roy Salgado, for talking things through, as always, and of course, your colleagues at the University of Holy Cross for helping us. And thank you for watching and being a part of Coping Today.